In 1978, the fastest American vehicle from 0 to 100 wasn't a sports car. It wasn't a Corvette, a Trans Am, or anything wearing a hood scoop like a warning label. It was a Dodge truck with wood trim, chrome exhaust stacks, and the kind of red paint that looked more carnival than competition. That is what makes the Little Red Express feel almost illegal, even though the whole point is that it was completely legal. Look at it for 5 seconds, and nothing about it makes sense as a performance machine. The bed has oak trim. The exhaust stacks rise behind the cab like something borrowed from a semi. The decals look playful, almost ridiculous, and the truck sits there with the blunt face of a late 70s work pickup. Then the stopwatch comes out. This was the era when American performance was supposed to be dying in public. The big block muscle cars were gone. Insurance, fuel prices, emissions rules, and low compression had taken the teeth out of Detroit's old heroes. A 1978 Corvette still looked fast, but the numbers were no longer from the golden age. Trans Ams had the theater. Camaros had the stance. Everybody had decals. Dodge had a rulebook. That is the part people miss. The Little Red Express was not born because Dodge suddenly decided that a step-side pickup deserved to embarrass sports cars. It was born because somebody inside Chrysler looked at the rules and noticed that trucks were not being treated like cars. In a decade that punished engines, the loophole mattered as much as the engine itself. So the fastest thing in America did not arrive low, sleek, and aerodynamic. It arrived with a wooden bed. By the late 70s, every American car company was living under pressure from emissions law. The Clean Air Act had pushed automakers toward massive reductions in exhaust pollution, and by the 1975 model year, catalytic converters had become a normal part of the passenger car world. They cleaned up the air, but in that period, they also changed how engines breathed. More restriction, more heat, more tuning compromises. For muscle car people, it felt like a cage. But the law was not written with equal weight across every category. Passenger cars were one thing. Trucks, especially heavier light trucks, sat in a different space. They were still treated more like tools than toys, and that difference opened a door wide enough for Dodge to drive a red pickup through it. Highland Park, Michigan, late 1977. A Dodge engineer is not staring at a clay model of a new sports coupe. He is staring at classifications, weight ratings, emissions requirements, and what a D-series pickup can legally be. Outside that paperwork, the American performance market looks half asleep. Inside the fine print, one number changes the whole mood. A gross vehicle weight rating above the limit gives Dodge room that Camaro, Corvette, and Firebird engineers do not have. That was the trick. Build the right truck, keep it in the right legal category, and the exhaust did not need to suffer the same way a passenger car's exhaust did. The 1978 Little Red Express could run without catalytic converters. It could breathe through freer exhaust. It could make noise that would have sounded outrageous in a new car showroom. The beautiful part is that Dodge did not hide the result. They exaggerated it. Those vertical chrome stacks behind the cab were not subtle. They were a confession. The truck was telling you where the advantage lived. Not in aerodynamics, not in advanced suspension, not in European engineering sophistication. The advantage was exhaust flow, classification, and timing. That is why the Little Red Express was more than a gimmick. The wood and the decals got attention, but the real machine was a loophole wearing costume jewelry. And Dodge still needed an engine worthy of that loophole. Under the hood was a 360 cubic inch V8, but not just the sleepy small block you might expect in a normal pickup. Dodge used a special high-performance version known by the EH1 code, tied closely to the E58 Police Spec 360. That matters because police engines were built for a different job than grocery-getter engines. They had to run hard, tolerate heat, and keep pulling when a regular Smog-era V8 was already giving up. The factory rating was 225 net horsepower and 340 pound-feet of torque. Today, those numbers do not sound shocking. In 1978, they landed differently. A lot of Detroit horsepower had been strangled down into figures that looked almost humiliating compared to 1970. A pickup making 225 net horsepower, with freer breathing and short gearing, was not a joke. It was a problem. The hardware around the engine was just as important. The Lyle Red Express used a modified Load Flight 727 automatic transmission, a tough 3-speed automatic that could take abuse. Outback, a 3.55.1 rear axle, gave the truck the kind of launch and mid-range pull that made it feel alive before the stopwatch even reached the numbers that made it famous. Nothing about this was delicate. Open the hood, and the story is not exotic. No overhead cams. No fuel injection computer making 1,000 calculations a second. No turbocharger hiding the lack of displacement. Just a small block Chrysler V8, a 4-barrel carburetor, police-bred parts, a strong automatic, and a truck exemption letting the exhaust do what the engine wanted. That combination gave the Little Red Express its strange personality. It was not trying to corner like a Corvette. It was not trying to look like a Trans Am. It was built to hit hard in a straight line, make noise while doing it, and keep pulling after the cars around it had started to feel strangled. The stacks were part of the performance theatre, but they were also part of the explanation. Exhaust leaves the engine, passes through Hemi-style mufflers and a crossover, then climbs those chrome pipes behind the cab. The visual was almost cartoonish, but the mechanism was serious. Less restriction, better breathing, more usable power. That is where the truck becomes dangerous to underestimate. If you judge it by shape, it looks like a refrigerator with side steps. If you judge it by the rulebook, it becomes one of the smartest performance vehicles of the decade. Then Car and Driver tested it. The famous part of the Little Red Express story is not that it was quick from 0 to 60. That number gets repeated because it is simple, but it does not fully explain why the truck became a legend. The real headline was 0 to 100 miles per hour. Car and Driver's 1978 testing put the Little Red Express at the top among American production vehicles in that run. The number that stuck was 19.9 seconds to 190 steadiums. In a normal year, that would be respectable. In 1978, with American performance cars trying to survive emissions rules, it was embarrassing. For everyone else. On the test strip in 1978, the scene must have looked wrong before the first launch. A red Dodge stepside sits near machines that look far more qualified for speed. The hood is flat, the bed is open, the stacks are shining behind the cab. When it leaves the line, it does not carve the air, it punches a square hole through it. But the speed keeps building. 60 comes and goes. The bluff front end keeps pushing. The V8 keeps breathing. And the truck is still accelerating, where some of the era's performance names are starting to feel tired. That is the turn in the story. The Little Red Express was not just a funny truck that happened to be fast. It exposed how weak the old categories had become. In 1978, car did not automatically mean performance, and truck did not automatically mean slow. The law had separated them. Dodge exploited the separation better than anyone. A Corvette still had the image, a Trans Am still had the cultural power. But the Dodge had the cleanest path between the engine and the tailpipe. That path mattered more than the shape of the body. This is also why the claim feels so satisfying. The Little Red Express did not beat the Malaise era by pretending it was still 1970. It beat the Malaise era by understanding 1978 better than the performance cars did. The old muscle formula had become politically and mechanically expensive. Dodge found a side door. There is one fair objection. The Little Red Express was not the fastest American vehicle in every possible measure. It was not the highest top-speed machine in every comparison, and it was not a sports car in handling, braking feel, or road course behavior. Nobody should confuse it with a balanced performance car. But from 0 to 100, in that specific American production context, it delivered the number that made the legend. That specificity is what makes the story stronger, not weaker. The truck did not need to be everything. It only needed to win the one test that revealed the decade's absurdity. Then 1979 arrived and started closing the door. The problem with loopholes is that they attract attention. For 1979, the Little Red Express returned, but the world around it had changed. Emission standards caught up with more light-duty trucks, and the truck now had a catalytic converter. It required unleaded gasoline. The exhaust advantage that made the 1978 version so special was no longer the same. The changes were visible too. The 1979 truck got a flatter hood, dual square headlights instead of the earlier round lamps, and an 85 mph speedometer, the kind of detail that tells you exactly what era you are sitting in. A machine famous for running to 100 now had a dashboard that seemed embarrassed to admit speed existed above 85. That was the mood of the late 70s. The second oil crisis made thirsty toys harder to defend. Noise regulations kept the Lille Red Express out of some places. The whole American market was moving towards smaller numbers, smaller expectations, and more control. Dodge still built more trucks in 1979 than in 1978, but the magic was thinner. The story had become a product line, and product lines have to survive rules, fuel prices, and corporate reality. By 1980, it was gone. That short life is part of why the truck still matters. The Lille Red Express was not refined over 5 generations. It did not slowly become normal. It appeared in the exact gap between old muscle and modern performance trucks, made its point loudly, and disappeared before the industry could domesticate it. That is rare. In pure production numbers, the Lille Red Express was never common. Dodge built 2,188 for 1978 and 5,118 for 1979, for a total of 7,306 trucks. Those numbers are small enough to make clean examples collectible, but large enough that the legend was not just a prototype fantasy. Real people could walk into the right Dodge dealer and buy one. Today, that is why the truck sits in such a strange place in the collector world. It is not a traditional muscle car, but it carries muscle car energy. It is not a normal pickup, but it helped define the idea that a factory truck could be sold as a street performance machine. Clean examples now trade in the territory of serious classic pickups, and the best ones can bring new car money. But the value is not only financial. The Lille Red Express is remembered because it makes the late 70s less simple. That era is often described as the moment American performance died. The Red Dodge proves something more interesting. Performance did not die evenly. It moved into strange shapes, hid in categories nobody was watching, and sometimes came back wearing oak trim. That is the real legacy. Dodge did not simply build a fast truck. Dodge showed that the next American performance story might not come from the obvious place. It might come from a work vehicle, a loophole, a police engine, and a pair of ridiculous chrome stacks. The Lille Red Express looked like a joke until the stopwatch made it serious. And that idea did not disappear. Dodge proved a truck could outrun Detroit's cars. 12 years later, Chevy answered with the biggest engine they had. And that story ends even stranger.